Hey guys, and welcome once again to the Weekly Critically. My name is Jaggerous, and I'm joined by the lovely Crash Overlord.
Hello guys, today we'll be looking at Matt's Fans 1025's Beast Chucker Deathwish, the Nova edition. So this is a Seri Nova Dagon deck, so the win condition of the deck is to win the first round, preferably with a long round with the use of Fog as your, long round engine, alongside some really good Deathwish synergy in the forms of Dao and Griffin, and obviously
Cyclops.
We've got Rotfiend as well.
And Rotfiend, that's true. And it's kind of a fun deck to play, and basically what Metsfan has done is they're trying to change the archetype a little bit by thinning it down and then adding some beast synergies. So the idea here is that you have Harpies, so they get summoned whenever an allied beast is destroyed, and then you can use your Folktails to eat your Griffins, which are beasts, and also Harpies themselves are beasts, and the last one is that the wolves that come from your Wooden Spirit are beasts. So that's the kind of idea. Also, I just realized Shadow Fiend, or Fiend, is now called Muralolololon.
Oh yeah, that's going to be amazing to pronounce. It's going to be so fun.
Yep, that sounds fun. But let's jump into a game and we'll try out this deck.
Mahakam wasn't built in a day.
Oh look, it's Broover. What a surprise. That is definitely not a deck I expected to see on the rank ladder.
The main point of your mulligans here is to prevent Harpies and Foglets to be in your hand, while maybe maintaining more of a singleton vibe in your bronzes, so that you actually do have Slizzard targets in your deck as early as round 1, potentially with the use of Forktails and Cyclops.
Yep, so what do you like to throw here then if we're doing that? We have the option of a Rotfiend, a Forktail, or a Griffin to ensure that we have, two of things.
I definitely like tossing one Rotfiend. It's a great target for Sheetroll, and I like having it still in the deck as a later game option. One Rotfiend without Cyclops should be more than enough.
Cool.
And thankfully we drew Shadow for, Marlorn for Dao.
Yep, so what's the opening play with this deck?
It's going to be either Dagon Fog or Shadow. Marlorn into Dao. It's one of those type of decks where you need to kind of set up before you start playing your multi-value cards.
Yeah. In this situation, I like Dao simply because, if we play Fog onto this row, he's just not going to play into it, right? And this way, we're still ahead, which is what you want because we lost the coin flip. We came blue. I say lost the coin flip, but it's not. I mean, it does. You do win and you do lose, but for some people that doesn't make any sense. People typically think that blue coin is losing. I'm going to put that one out there.
It's losing a pretty bad 50-50 flip. But yeah, obviously you don't want to play Fog too early. It just makes your opponent play around it. And you don't have things like Drowners in this deck to be able to reposition him.
Ooh, so if we play Fog, we'll get ahead because that will pull a Foglet. And this is actually a really nice big target to chunk Fog on. So this is what I meant by kind of sitting down. How do you feel about this deck in terms of row stacking versus spreading units out?
So I like to be somewhat careful of not row stacking too hard into the Dao rows, because that row ends up getting filled really, really, really fast because of Griffins essentially putting 2 units onto it. So if you're in a position where you can choose any row, I just wouldn't stack into the row where you've already got Dao on.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to end up in a situation where you don't really have a choice about what you play. So Dao is dead. That's okay because we do have the Rotfiend as an option. And we can also actually pull another one with Slizzard.
I quite like being able to use one for Slizzard here, just because Rotfiend's looking at maybe 4 value per Deathwish, and Deathwish is worth, 8 value.
Yeah, and then you'll see we put the Dao on the front row because this is the emptiest row, so then when we do start triggering it with the Griffins, there's lots and lots of space for these little lesser Dao. I mean, that's kind of a shame. This Dao, I think he's a pretty great Dao. I wouldn't say he's lesser, but...
No, he's just a small Dao.
Small Dao, yeah.
Small Dao.
I'm going to call them that from now on. They're going to be small Daos.
We were not the ones to start this war.
It's kind of unfortunate. This deck, this specific list actually isn't running Frightener, which would be a lovely addition to have here, and we'll look into that later. But we're kind of forced into a position where because it's Brewer, if we pass now, we just end up getting... I think we get beat in one card.
Yeah, 16 points. He's likely to play Cleaver, for example. That'll give him 18 or so points. Like, he's got a big enough target, so...
20. It's actually a draw. Brewer into Cleaver is actually a draw, which means we can actually pass here. If we continue playing, we're gonna end up just going down to cards. And this is actually the beauty of Dagon, specifically.
So Brewer into Cleaver. And it is a draw, which is alright, because then he has to go first. Because we passed first. So the tie is not too bad here. It's not ideal, but it's not too bad. And we do have the option of Woodland Spirit if we get lucky with ghouls. So a longer round is okay.
Yeah, and alongside that... alongside that, we still have... if one of our Rot Fiends dies, we still have the option of Gels pulling out Wispus? Or is it Brewis?
Brewis, yeah.
And it's Brewis. To res a Dao and the Rot Fiend as well, so...
So I guess we just play the Harpy, right? That's a stalling tactic.
Mm-hmm.
And then see what kind of happens. Because the thing is with Rot Fiends, we want to play them on a stacked row. They're our Deathwish unit at this point, so we want a stacked row, and we have to wait for that to happen.
Yeah. Thankfully, elves do have quite filled... get their rows filled quite a bit over the course of the game, so that's great.
How do you feel about going for something like a Osrel at this point? Again, just to give time. We've got a big target with the 13, although it does open us up to, like, you know, a Scorch or a Shiru or what have you.
I think it's a fair play. It's a stalling tactic that enables, like, you know, just, as you said, wasting some time. The other option is to try and high roll Gels, but I think if Gels finds Brewis right now, we have almost no chance of victory, so I'd rather kind of wait on it just a little bit.
Yeah, and now we have 3 units in one row, so this is where we can start to look to put him into a bit of an awkward spot with the Rot Fiends, because at this point we're running out of options to delay, and we can't play the Griffins until we play a Deathwish unit, so this is where I would play a Rot Fiend like that, in order to just kind of get that out there. And we can always play a Rot Fiend on a different row once he starts to stack other places.
Yeah.
You think Griffin here?
I would definitely play a Griffin here.
And you can see that triggers the Deathwish unit without killing the unit. That's the kind of idea behind that.
You annoy me.
And now we can look to play a Rot Fiend on the back row. So this is the thing, we forced him into stacking. So now what we could do is play this on the back row, and then we've got more targets should we want to play Griffins.
There's a potential of just waiting here for a bit longer. The problem I have with playing something like a Fourtail to trigger the mid-row Rot Fiend and also kill the Beast for the second Harpy, since Griffin is a Beast, you've got that synergy there, is that if that is Malena that he had played, he would actually gain a target. So I like your play of Rot Fiend a lot.
Yep, and basically what it's done is it's just, you know, been kind of made us more cautious in case that's Malena, because then he doesn't get to steal anything. As it is, we've got another target, which means that every time we trigger this, it's now 10 damage, which I think is pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, should we trigger it?
I would actually look into playing Fourtail here, just so I can play Gels earlier.
In which case we eat the Griffin and the middle one, because obviously we want to trigger this one before we eat it. So that's kind of the thought process there.
Because we will, if Gels does find Woodland, we'd want to play it earlier than later, right?
Yep.
So Fog can do more damage.
So it's just a case of kind of finding the balance with when you want to play these cards. Because Guilds, if we get Brewis, we want Deathwish units in our graveyard. So you kind of have to balance for each opportunity. And I think this is where you would play Guilds.
Definitely.
So let's see what we roll. Woodland or Monster's Nest?
I'm fairly sure Woodland is better.
Yep.
We still have a Foglet in our deck, and the Fog still has enough time to deal damage.
Yep, I'll pop that Fog on the middle row. It doesn't really matter with the row stacked this much which one you choose. Bear in mind though that the Foglet, I think Foglet always goes to the opposite row, so you know if you don't want your Foglet on a specific row, that's the other thing to be aware of. So now we Griffin. The Rot Fiend, because you can still eat it and trigger it once more, is the reality. So actually, not in a bad spot. Although that spy unit, you know, it's likely what Trivial or Milena at this point.
Most likely going to be Trivial, yeah. And I don't know though. One card v one card at the end of the game, we have a C-Nova. We're most likely going to be playing a 22 where he plays a 15. We'll see. It's pretty close. Fortail is, I think, the obvious choice here. And we can just make it as small as possible. So I would be looking to eat a 1. As long as that doesn't make us stack for like a big Shiro.
No, because we're going to eat the Rock Fiend, obviously, to trigger the damage. Because this is just a transfer of points.
Yeah.
So we can do that, and we have a big Shiro because he has 2 18s, unfortunately.
Yeah. If we had like only one Harpy or one Foglet, we'd have been able to eat the 4 to prevent the Milena from having full value. But since we had 2 targets, it was better to just eat the Rot Fiend.
Yeah. And that came out surprisingly close. I mean, it's a bit awkward that we drew into the Harpy. You know, if we'd drawn into, say, a Monster's Nest, for example, I'm pretty sure we would have been in a much stronger position and would have had a chance to win that matchup.
Yeah, and the Monster's Nest there was representing potentially 15 points, which would have been an exact draw here.
Yeah, because we would have thinned the Harpy from eating a wolf, for example. So we had a way of thinning the Harpy, so a little bit unfortunate, but I think ultimately a good game. Anyway, let's jump into the deck builder. We'll make some tweaks, and we'll show how you could maybe change to this deck in order to improve it.
So, as we saw in that game, cards like Harpies, while they net 0, no cost plus point value, they're also kind of risky because if you don't manage to thin them out early in the game, they can brick your draws. And if in a position where you don't even have Sirenova in your hand or Gels to find it, you definitely want your draws to be as good as possible. Which is why I think cards like Harpy that take a lot of setup in a deck that already requires a lot of setup don't necessarily work. And I would honestly just like to replace them with more points. As this deck does run units like Cyclops, like Griffin, and preferably once we put in Frightener, also Frightener, cards like Ghouls are looking mighty strong as a, honestly, on the lowest point, a 13-point play, a 15-point, we've got a 15-point play with Cyclops, and even a 17-point play with something like a Frightener or the enemy spy. So that would be where I would be looking for my first change.
Yeah, it gives you strength, which, is tempo plays, whereas we also saw that the Harpy bricked our draws in that previous game, so having Ghouls in here, it gives you those options. But the thing is, once you've placed Ghouls in the deck, you don't need nearly as much consume in the form of Forktails. So that is something that I think is then worth switching out as well, if you're putting Ghouls in and taking...
Since Forktails are here essentially to, enable the Harpies, I think even if you want to keep the Harpies in your deck, that's a completely up to you. And if you do want to keep the Harpy packages for earlier round strength, that's completely fine. But I would replace the Forktails with a Barbegazi, or as I like to call them, barbecues, just because they represent more points. A second consume trigger isn't nearly as valuable, especially if you're, running 2 Forktails. The second Forktail is often essentially worthless, right? It's just an 8 consume 2, but since you have no neckers, the consume doesn't represent anything other than a Deathwish trigger. But again, with Cyclops already in the deck as well, you're gonna be a hard stuck to find, many opportunities where the second consume is gonna be useful, which is where Barbegazi comes in, where the single consume is actually more than good enough. And since it represents carryover, it prevents, just war dancers from completely destroying you.
Yep, and on top of that, well, you just said it's carryover. I was going to say the same thing. I was like, on top of that, it's carryover. But yeah, that is exactly why Barbegazi is quite strong, especially in the current meta where War Dancers are quite common, and also Skellige decks which are running things like Augeard and Morkvarg. So carryover is just a useful thing to have, especially, if you lose the coin flip, and especially if you're running a deck without Frightener. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we're looking at a Sirenova deck that is running 5 silvers, but isn't running Frightener. Even though Series Nova essentially weakness, I guess, or biggest weakness, if I want to be correct, is the fact that if you go down in cards, cards like Sheru just trade up versus you. You know, you're playing a somewhat worse deck to be able to play this amazing gold that then gets completely countered by them being able to have last say. So cards like Frightener end up being extremely useful, as we saw in that game as well. Because our opponent played Spy, we couldn't continue playing as we just go down a card. Whereas if we had a Frightener, we can just drop that and continue playing into that fog and gaining more and more value.
Yep, because you could pull units into the fog with the Frightener. That's kind of part of his package. And also you can use this quite nicely with Rot Fiends, because you can then try and stack a row even further, which gives you more value out of your Rot Fiends. So I think Frightener is a really useful card, especially in this style of deck. The other thing we want to talk about is kind of Striga here. Striga is a 6 strength unit, deal 8 damage to a non-monster unit. I mean, it's a 14-point play. It's kind of solid in that regard. But in a Monster's Mirror, it's 6 points. And it doesn't really have a lot of synergy with the deck, you know, whereas because we've added stuff like the ghouls, for example, then maybe it's worth thinking about something like a Giant Toad.
Yeah, a Giant Toad and Manticore as a combo is like amazingly potent. Giant Toad, even in and of itself, is quite strong as this deck because it has additional targets in the forms of even Frightener if you don't need it in a specific matchups, or just Cyclops as a 17-point silver, plus Thinning. I think Giant Toad is extremely strong and potent as a card. And Ozrel, as much as I like it and as much as it's essentially just an 18-point silver and like very often, being able to run, you know, Giant Toad plus Manticore as a combo does put +2 points onto your ghoul, and you are playing essentially a 19-point silver as well then. So I think overall it does gain a bit of strength. Now, if your goal is to counter something like SK carryover with all geared, I can definitely see Ozrel being correct, but I think I would maybe look for the cut then in the other 3 silver slots in Maelstrom, Sheetroll, or Monster's Nest. Obviously, all of those 3 cards are really good, but Monster's Nest has lost quite a bit of value over the last patch since it got nerfed by 2 points.
Yeah, so I think I'm happy with this deck. Are you happy with this deck, Crash?
I'm really happy with this deck. I definitely agree with the golds, though.
Yeah, I think the gold choices were really solid, and ultimately, you know, with a few small changes, you can hopefully kind of fine-tune the deck a little bit and make it a little bit more synergistic. Anyway, let's jump into a game, and we'll play this deck now.
My folk have suffered much.
Would you have guessed this is the last day of the faction challenge with how much Square Tail we're seeing?
Wait, there's a faction challenge going on right now? I didn't even notice. But
we obviously threw the Foglet. Then what do you like?
I actually like having kind of Rot Fiends still in the deck. Especially, well, at least one of them, right? Ghouls are really good later on, and especially because we've got a Sheetroll, I would even consider tossing just the second Rot Fiend and, you know, getting maybe a Griffin or a Cyclops.
Rot Fiends, they are quite nice in a Francesca deck, against a Francesca deck, because they do tend to row stack, so that is kind of worth considering. But on the flip side, we have Giant Toad, we have Frightener, so we do have decent odds of finding them later. Opening play, I like a Dow.
Yeah. Dow to set up the
That's
small
true, although we
Dow.
don't have Griffins, so we'd have to eat him if we want to find some small Dow.
That's definitely fine as an option, though. And we do still have, you know, we have a few passing plays where we can just... we still have Slizzards to use to, you know, enable the second now. Now, obviously, this would make our Brewer slightly weaker in the later stages, or like in super short round 3. Obvious, because, you know, Rotfiend wouldn't get as much value as a Dow. But I think it's still a very good play, and it enables us to play.
Yeah, we also don't want to play the Fog just yet until he's played a few more targets, because at the moment, you know, if as soon as we play Fog, he's not going to play into that row. So, in order to get Ivan Porterburger to play into one row, we can kind of delay. And see, now we've got 2 targets, so now this is where fog becomes more favorable because it's going to tick for at least 6 rounds. And we have Frightener, so then we can always pull something into that row should we wish to.
Yeah. It's a bit annoying that their opponents has decided to kill
Our
all
units,
our,
yeah. This does happen sometimes. You know, sometimes they have
units.
Cleaver, or they have Yorvith, or they have Ida, and there's a pass. We won.
Well, we won the round.
We won.
That
So
is
we have
definitely
Frightener,
true.
which means we can bleed them this round, even if they have carryover. And we also have Barbagazi, so we can always set up our own carryover this round, should we wish to. I'm going to mulligan the Foglet, and we got a Cyclops.
No, I think I would still like to bleed this round. We've got a very good, maybe 2 to 3 card, or 3 to 4 card round 3 here, because we've got the Giant Toad, we've got the Ghoul, and those are 19 and 17 point players, and we also have Sirinova on top of that. So if we can actually just use this round to bleed them out, set up, you know, minuscule amounts of carryover in the form of Barbagazi, we're looking very solid.
So what do you like as your
going
opener? Do
into
you want
round
to just
3.
go Frightener and get the card? Because sometimes you can choose not to play
just
Frightener if you want to
Frightener
try
it
and
up.
force them to play tempo. Because if you play Frightener, they're like, oh, you've just given me 13 points, I'll play low tempo. Whereas if you don't play much, sometimes they're more inclined to play higher point cards, and then later in the round you can be like, surprise, I got Frightener. But in this situation, we don't have very good proactive plays, so Frightener's a great call.
So we have an option of saving Giant Toad. We also have an option of using it here. I like kind of saving it, though it does, you know, lend to the chance of us drawing a pretty bad card in our bronzes. But since our deck still has like 3 silvers, or 2 silvers and 3 golds, I think keeping the Giant Toad for round 3 is completely fine. And I would like to just, you know, essentially play worthless cards here just to make my opponent play
How do you
worthless
feel about
cards.
She-Troll,
Does that make
considering,
sense?
you know, we're not likely to put any more Deathwish units into our graveyard until the next round? We could play She-Troll and just get some points.
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
so then the Deathwish unit, it'll be a Rot Fiend. And then it gets eaten. So, you know, you want to play it opposite something that you're going to hit, basically, was the plan there.
So, small note, as I was just gonna say, it actually doesn't matter where you place She-Troll,
Oh, there
it
you
matters
go.
where you place the Rot Fiend.
I didn't know that.
Squirted you out.
Yeah, you can play the She-Troll into any row as long as the Rot Fiend that you're going to consume with She-Troll
But what
is
that's
placed
also
on
done
the
is that's
row
actually enabled our
you want
Slizzard,
to do
because
damage
we
to.
now have a Rot Fiend in the graveyard. So that's part of the reason why you would make a play like that. What do you want to play in the meantime? Because we do want to let him kind of start to stack a little bit.
Honestly, I kind of just like playing, you know, like a Cyclops. It really doesn't matter. The second Cyclops is never gonna get value here. And as I said, I just kind of want to play cards to make my
Yeah,
opponent
I agree
play
with that
cards.
completely. I think the
you know?
Cyclops, because especially we had a big target, so, you know, the killing the She-Troll was fine. The worst is like you kill a 9 and you shoot a 1, for example, then you're just losing points. But in this situation, it's not too bad. Although our opponent currently not stacking, so we don't have the option yet to play the Slizzard. So maybe Barbagazi, but then we have to eat an 11, so we have one big target. That's the only risk we have with this situation.
I think I'm very worried at this point that our opponent's actually hand buff, because it does look like it is. And honestly, we might end up losing a round 3 to just like really big sword masters, but he hasn't played any engines yet, which makes me feel a bit safer to just continue into a long round and honestly just bleed him out. I think Barbagazi on a 17 on 11 is fine. We're not going to be using it to eat a Rot Fiend later on, just because we'll be using Cyclops.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative
on it
there was you could
instead.
Cyclops, but then we don't have an 11 strength target, and unfortunately there's the Shiro.
Who am I to kill?
But
On the other hand, that means that
that's true.
Shiro's not coming
That is
out
true.
round 3. I think at this point we were kind of forced into just playing our Rot Fiend, and yeah, we definitely play it onto the last
yeah,
row.
it's kind of what happens sometimes is your opponent doesn't row stack, and that's kind of one of the risks with rock beans is because they do so well in a stacked row. So sometimes life is not happy. This guy just is removing everything.
Thankfully, we can still keep playing. The risk is if he has a spy, he can play his spy. But on the other hand, the risk of him having spy is somewhat low because he hadn't played it earlier, and I doubt he would use Francesca on a spy specifically, because that would mean it's an 16-point spy.
Realistically,
or 17
like,
even
when you
now
play a
if you
spy,
order.
often they'll play a spy in response. That's a very kind of standard form of play, because he didn't know necessarily that this round was going to go this well for him. So then holding a spy till this late is, you know, kind of questionable.
You should not have come here.
Very risky as well. And I would honestly just, you know, use the Griffin to get rid of one of his
because we won the
cards
first
as
round,
well.
we can kind of afford to bleed him here. And I don't know, it feels like a kind of weird hybrid hand buff kind of situation. It's a bit of an no. I don't know. That's not hand buff, you know. But then he got. Did he not get the elf into Elven Scout? Yeah, he got Elven Scout into Freehead Vanguard. So it's not elf spam necessarily either.
It looks either like hand buff or it looks like a control deck. I'm very I'm leaning much more towards there being like sword masters in his hand, but he hasn't played any dragoons, which means at maximum they're not gonna be that big.
So I think we take the pass here. We've bled to where we want. We have the Toad Prince into Manticore combo with the Ghoul, so we can then use the Ghoul to eat the Manticore a second time. We have Nova, so, you know, we have a lot of points in hand. This is like a comfortable hand going into the third round.
And preferably we'd like to...
we drew Brewers. I think that's fine. We have Bronze Wish Death unit, Bronze Deathwish units, Bronze Wish Death units in our deck. So we're in a pretty okay position.
None shall tread
As I
on
said,
us.
I would be looking for, you know, more golds or more silvers off of the Giant Toad here. And I think Giant Toad is the card we play first. Or we could, if those are really big buffed sword dancers, we could try and bait them out as removal against their Deathwish units, even though we have no way to trigger them currently.
Oh yeah, because we
can get only one Dow.
We got two Deathwish units, so Dow on the middle row, Rockfiend on the front row, and then if he does have removal, you can try and encourage him to use it now.
And I think there's only one specific deck where I would like to avoid. You know, we have this very, very straight up simple rule of play Dow into the empty row.
The time of the
But
white frost
versus
and white
Alchemy,
light
I would actually
is
like to
nigh.
avoid that.
That is perfect. They
perfect.
gave us points there. We had no way of making the little Dows come out to play. So let's go with the Toad Prince play now, because we have to play that before we play the Ghoul. We got a Griffin. And actually that's quite nice, because we have a Rockfiend on the board, so we can use those together. So let's eat up our Manticore now for a...
So if he's got a Sword Master that's essentially buffed to like 10 hit or
Swords
something
I
along those
smile
lines,
at,
or even a 13,
weapons
right?
laugh
His
to
best play is
scorn.
obviously to hit Giant Toad. But sometimes our opponents will hit, you know, the Rotfiends in case we've got more activations for it. Thankfully he didn't, and now Griffin just ends up being, you
which
know,
is
a 13
that's
point
nice.
play.
13 points is not bad.
Some
And then
things
we play
cannot
Ghoul,
be
and then we
forgiven.
play Nova. So this situation is just play the one that's slightly fewer points first, and then play the one that's, you know, 22 points. And we're up 9, so I think we're in a really good spot, especially as we've already seen the Swordmaster, which
You've
means that
talked
their Nova
enough.
doesn't overcome our Nova, and we
Don't
win the
make
round.
me laugh.
Yeah. And as I said, like, Ghoul here is really good because instead of giving us slightly more tempo in forms of Harpies, it gives us a lot more power around 3, and it enables us to really, you know, win that round.
Yeah,
when
and
we
you
get
can kind of
to it.
see exactly how solid those cards were. You saw the benefit of the Frightener, allowing us to bleed going into the second round. We saw the benefit of the Ghoul package. We saw the Giant Toad into the Manticore, and you can kind of see the strength of the cards that we put into the deck and why they're worthwhile changes versus the Harpy synergy. Because as much fun as Beasts are, you know, it can really brick your draws, and that can be quite uncomfortable realistically. Whereas we won by... How many points did we win by? We won by 6 that time. So, you know, decent. And ultimately we didn't find the last Foglet, so I'm pretty happy with that.
Another small thing is people are really afraid of carryover, so they'll go to extra lengths to kill it in the form of shadowing essentially a 6-point
the
bronze play.
Barbagazis do bait out removal as well, which is nice, because then you can trigger your Deathwish units. Although we saw that we actually managed to trigger them into giving us the Dow play. You know, they killed the Dow and ultimately gave us points because they were worried we were going to Griffin it. So it's pretty solid. Anyway, guys, this has been a Deathwish Nova deck supplied by Mets fans, so shout out to you. And if you want to submit your own deck, we'll have a link in the description below to our Discord. You can go on the Discord. There is a text channel called Topdeck Critique. If you post your decks in there, then me and Crash can check them out, and potentially you will be the deck chosen for next week's Weekly Critically. Oh, that's a mouthful. But yeah, I don't think we have anything left to say for today, so beyond that, you can always subscribe to the channel, and if you like this video, leave a like. Let us know what you guys thought of the deck in the comments below. Anything else to say, Crash?
No, shout out to you, Jag, for, you know, the idea of
Thanks for
Weekly
watching, and we'll see you
Critique,
guys
and I'll
next
see you
week.
next week.
Bye!